Tafaimamao Lefu Tua Tupuola, where we keep your cup of Koko Samoa full with innovations and creativity in American Samoa's tech community. I am Gingerly Porter with my co-host, Michael McDonald of the American Samoa Department of Commerce. Talofa, Michael.
Talofa, Tafaimamao, Ginger. How are you?
It's been great. How are you?
I'm doing fine. It's another week in paradise. Of course, today's Monday, September 14th. And yeah, it's beautiful out here. The weather's great.
And it's September 14th. And I was just looking over my notes. We started this in July. July 8th was our first episode. So we've come a long way.
That's good to hear. That's good to know. It's nice to start something and then be consistent with, you know, the execution. And I know you've pointed this out many times in the past. We've got to be persistent if we're going to get the message out. And so, yeah, no, we're still doing it. And I think we have another great interview lined up for today, right?
Yes, we do. But I have to say first that I'm admiring, you know, where you're coming in from today. It looks like work in the fields.
Yes, I've moved my location. I think I shared this with you early on, but I love to show off our beautiful territory whenever I can. And so today I'm broadcasting to you from the beautiful island of Nu'uuli.
Oh,
and I'm in the I'm in the Kaufusi, or the taro patch. And according to the folks in Nu'uuli, they have the best taro anywhere in the world. And I'm lucky because it's right here behind me. And they are right. It is really good taro, and they do a fantastic job out there making sure that they stick with the tradition. They continue to plant their plantations. It's all you know, part of our culture and living here in American Samoa. It's a beautiful place out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I won't argue with people from Nu'uuli.
That's right. You're an Awasi girl, right?
I'm right across. So let's just say they have to pass my house, you know, to go anywhere.
Right.
And the toll will be some taro.
Right.
So going back to our conversation on broadband, right? So American Samoa has been in the midst. Like, we've been in these conversations since July to develop our territorial broadband strategy and to define and identify some of the how. Right? How can broadband better our lives, produce higher growth? How can we use broadband for better decision making? And I just want to point out once again for our audience, because it's been a while,
okay.
The purpose of this program, this KokoBytes, is to raise awareness of broadband economy, broadband opportunities in American Samoa. So addressing the questions at an individual level, at a village level, community level, businesses, institutions, and governments. So, you know, we would say it makes our lives more productive, meaning we can do more with the same resources because of the knowledge, the interchange, the transactions that broadband makes possible.
Right.
And so, you know, just to finish up my thought, but as a minority group, you know, us as Samoans, we get that within our community, there are people often overlooked, rarely included in conversations, and for the most part, are voiceless and powerless. And those are people with disabilities.
Right.
And so, you know, how can broadband help provide better services with people with disabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question, you know, and you hit it right on the head. You know, the community that you just mentioned, you know, people with disabilities, their families and their support networks as well. They often go overlooked. Obviously, there are many needs, you know, when we step back and take a look at our community, and there's so many fires to put out. Everybody has a different need. Especially in an underserved community like American Samoa, but this section of our community does tend to get overlooked a great deal. And so this is going to be a great conversation today to discuss some ways that the lives of these people and these families can see improvement. by utilizing and leveraging broadband. So yeah, no, look forward to this conversation.
All right, so today's guest has a vested interest as an advocate for people with disabilities. So when she speaks and when she talks about disabled and disabilities, you can feel the passion in her voice. So I'm excited because for her, it's not a job, right? It's her mission. And so Tafaimamao Lefu Tupuola is a graduate of Samoana High School. And
Go Sharks.
Yes. Her first government job was at Nu'uuli Vocation High School, where she taught deaf class for 2.5 years before she moved to the American Samoa Community College, where she worked as an assistant trainer at the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disability, or what's known as UCEDD. UCEDD is a federally funded program at ASCC, and from being an assistant trainer, Tafa currently serves as the director, and she's been director for the last 20 years. The UCEDD addresses systemic issues and advocates in the field of special education, housing, employment, emergency preparedness, recreation, health, and accessible capacity for people with disabilities. So this woman has done so much in her career. Tafa has served for 5 years as a community representative on the American Samoa Legal Aid Board, and 4 of which she was president. She served for 4 years on the Federal Communications Commission Disability Advisory Council. And then she was appointed as a member of the FEMA Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, or IPAWS Subcommittee. And she also is the president of the Special Olympic Amerika Samoa. And if that's not enough, she is currently the president of Lions Club of Pago. So with that, wow, we're going to bring her right into our conversation.
Yeah, let's get Tafa in.
And there she goes. Good morning, Tafa.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good morning, Tafa.
So Michael and I have been, reading and listening to what you've done in your career, and I'm thinking, this woman, does she have time for herself?
But I'm at that age now. I'm ready for retirement.
Oh, come on now.
So Tafa, we like to ask our guests, with everything that's happened in your career and all these things that you've done, what keeps you from going coconuts?
That's a good question. I didn't know I stopped going coconuts, but I think what when I see things evolving and changing for the better, and I see a lot of inclusion in many conversations, like no matter what the topic may be, I know I can go to sleep at night and know that I'm included. I'm one of those people that's included with the conversation. So that helps me go to sleep at night knowing that there's a diverse conversation happening.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear, Tafa. Well, regarding the work that, I just learned a little bit more about from Ginger's introduction as she brought you in here. Of course, I've known you now for a couple of years, but I wanted to ask specifically, you've been an advocate now for people with disabilities for, well, your entire career, essentially. What are some of the highlights you've seen in the evolution of technology in American Samoa when it comes to serving this community of ours, specifically those folks with disabilities?
Here locally in the territory, we're slowly, very slowly starting to change around using the broadband for people with disability access. I'm starting to see more people with disability using Facebook, social media, and that is a very promising opening conduit to accessing a bigger conversation with other people and meeting other people online. Years ago, we saw social media as something that, you know, maybe you need to think about it, because we're always worried about cyberbullying, accessing inappropriate, um, you know, images and so forth. But I started to see a lot of people with disabilities, a lot of students with disability using Facebook to have conversation. And I started to think, once again, that, hey, they're socializing, just using a different platform. They're starting to use proper sentences, spelling a little bit better, you know, and I saw that as for something of improving their academic skills. Years ago, we used people with disabilities who, in the deaf community, they had this device called TDD, telecommunication device for the deaf, where you just take the phone handset and you put it on this typewriter device and you chat. So this was used back in the 70s, and this is the way they would communicate. But broadband now has allowed people with disability to use people who are deaf to use video relay service. So if I wanted to call Ginger and Ginger is hearing and I'm deaf, I can call this specific number and somebody would pick up the line, an operator, and I would sign to that operator and the operator would translate that information to Ginger. So now video relay service is now starting to be used a lot. I have not seen it used here locally, but I do know years ago in the 90s, Voc Rehab used TDD. So they had a dedicated TDD line in their office for communication. But now that video is accessible, people with, you know, who are deaf can sign back and forth using video, Zoom, all sorts of video platforms. So that has changed for the better. I do know that I have a lot of deaf friends that I tend to get a missed call. When I sat in a couple work groups, when I served on one of the subcommittees for FEMA, I partnered up with a deaf colleague out of North Carolina. And so we would use Skype at the time to do our assignments. So we would schedule time, she would sign, we would just sign back and forth. If there was any miscommunication with my signing, I would just text it to her and then she gets it and we continue the conversation. And I enjoyed that because I've been out of the deaf community for a couple of years. I started out as a deaf teacher for 2 years before I transferred here at ASCC at the American Samoa Community College. So when I'm out of touch with the language, I tend to forget. So this gave me an opportunity to kind of brush up my signing skills. But I do have to say what has improved in the Pacific is access to financial banking. I do know that in Fiji, they had this big kickoff where one of the banks there, ANZ, they had a big kickoff celebration about their ATM cards, their check cards, credit cards, about changing the cards to tap and go for people who are blind. So you see that like Wi-Fi symbol where you can just tap it. And this made it accessible for people who are blind to just bring out the card and tap it and they know the amount is being charged to their card. And then the other thing that they changed with their card is that they now have, they use Braille. So 2 dots on a card represent a debit card. 1 dot on the card would represent credit card. So you know which card you're pulling out.
Right.
And then when you insert it into the ATM machine, they have a cutout at the edge of the card to show which is the proper way to insert your card into the ATM machine. So technology is starting to be more and more accessible for people with disabilities. Even in the gaming world, we had Ewok, one of the most popular person in the world who plays Fortnite. She 13 years old, she's deaf, and Fortnite made her access in playing with her peers, you know, in the gaming world, where they put footsteps so she knows where the people at. So it allowed her to hear the footstep with the symbols, allow her to hear the commotion, you know, whatever was going on, the shooting, by putting up specific symbols. So this allowed her and other people who are deaf to access Fortnite or the gaming world.
Wow, that's incredible. I only recently got introduced to some of these games, but you know, I can totally see how those little improvements would completely change the gaming experience for anybody who has that disability. And I think, to your point, as you're talking to Fa, one of the things that I think from where I sit has really changed is that, you know, within this community, you know, people with disabilities, there are typically large numbers of folks who are not necessarily bedridden, but they're restricted in terms of their movement, and having access to the rest of the world by way of broadband, just, I would imagine, totally changes their life experience. So you now can travel virtually, you can see things, you know, outside your four walls that you never thought perhaps you'd ever see or experience. You can interact now virtually, like we're doing here. You know, if you're, again, stuck at home because of a disability or something along those lines. So I would imagine just having access to the outside world has impacted the quality of life for these folks.
Yeah.
Well,
So I'll just add really quickly onto Mike, and then I'll give you an opportunity. So you see a lot of these platforms like what we're using today, right? So now they've incorporated sign language, they've incorporated captions,
Subtitles.
right, subtitles. So all of these things, you see also the change in our approach as a community. So we're trying to reach everyone. And so I think this is a movement in a really good direction, right? So broadband for us in American Samoa is a driver for some of these things. And I do like that we're reaching people who are unable to even just go outside, right? So through the use of the internet, through the use of broadband to the home, I think that's a really important key, right? So building, yes, we talked about the infrastructure, and Tafa, you've been in some of these conversations, a lot of these conversations, from infrastructure to telecom to alerts, with your experience in IPAWS, and just pushing that service to reach all populations. So, you know, we've talked, and you've also mentioned a lot of things that broadband can help to address, you know, some of the needs in the population. And it's amazing some of the technology that's out there now. So where do you see the services for people with disabilities in American Samoa moving towards in the future?
that's a good question. And I think this would also kind of answer Michael's question as well, is that, you know, in light of COVID, and even if we didn't have COVID, we need to take into consideration living in American Samoa. We have limited qualified personnel in specific areas that can serve people with disabilities. And I'm saying such as speech pathology, physical therapy in school, occupational therapy in school. And this goes right back to telehealth, the conversation around telehealth.
Right.
How can we create an infrastructure in the schools that no matter what school, but I can almost guarantee you there is at least one student with a disability that needs some type of health care service. It could be speech. It could be mental health service. Something that we don't have here, and especially with the closure of the borders. How can we create this infrastructure in the school system, public or private, that every student can still access the related services that is necessary for them to live and be part of that classroom environment, right? And I think this would be very transforming to have this type of setup or infrastructure in place. You know, we talk about teletherapy, we talk about, you know, everything specific, but in reality, it all falls under the umbrella of telehealth. So, you know, this would be great to have and to help evaluate some students who are waiting to be evaluated to get the proper access to the standards. The other thing is that we were just recently awarded the No Wrong Door initiative, and this was basically to see what type of online access can people with disability who are remaining at home can still access their services, and then still be socially engaged with family and friends and the community in light of COVID. So we were hoping that we can purchase a couple of assistive technology that, you know, like Michael said earlier, that even if they're bedridden, they can still have a conversation with their family abroad. They can still feel that they're still part of the community if they remain within the home. You know, there's a lot of, you know, on my wish list, but you know, this is something that we can take advantage of using the broadband to help deliver more meaningful services to our community, not just in schools, but also in the aging community as well.
Now that's a great point, Tafa. Telehealth. We've spoken to this topic in a number of different previous conversations, but specifically as it relates to this population, you know, people with disabilities. I have a cousin who used to live here. She had 2 kids. Her and her husband lived out in Oasi. And they had to move back to the mainland because one of their kids has autism. He's autistic, and the services that they required were not available here in the schools. And, you know, it was really difficult for the family to move, but of course the priority is to take care of their kids. And so they're now back in the mainland up in Oregon, I think they're at right now. Nikki and her family. Hi, Nikki, if you're watching. But again, one of the things that I keep coming back to is, you know, to strengthen our community and to build a very resilient Samoan community, we need people to stay home. I mean, I'm a strong believer in that fundamental task. We've got to create opportunities, whether it's economic, educational, medical, to keep people here in American Samoa. I think our culture is strongly tied to where we come from, our land, you know, our islands, and being here in American Samoa. And so I think you bring up a very, very good point. And I hope to see a significant improvement in the delivery of services to, you know, this very special community via leveraging Hawaii.
Yeah, I agree. You know, one thing we need to keep in mind that our people have a right to live here. And they cannot live here if they cannot access the service necessary to live a quality of life, right? So I think that's something we need to keep in mind as we move towards that that light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. One step at a time, right? One step at a time. I did want to make one other observation, Tafa, if I may. You had mentioned early on that you're starting to see a lot of people with disabilities participate in conversations via social media. One of the things that I've noticed here in American Samoa was the awareness around some of the grassroots groups that are out there is making a difference via Facebook. You know, as an example, the PCNS American Samoa Facebook that Sandy coordinates. This is parents of children with special needs. I know so much more now about their program, their needs, the experiences of the families, because I follow that page. We've invited them out to, when I say we, my other hat with my wife and I, we've invited them out to South Pacific Water Sports for water days, you know, a couple years in a row. And a lot of this happened because of our awareness via social media. And so I think it can also play, broadband that is, can also play a tremendous part in just getting the rest of us to be aware of the needs for, again, this very special community of ours here at home.
Yes.
I think that's a really good point, right? So broadband brings people together. So I like that concept because I'm going to put a plug in here for our territorial broadband strategy. If you take a look at the logo, right, it's a house, it's a Samoan fale, but that's the idea, right? That it starts from the home, and the home is where we all come together, but broadband is then our way to connect out. So we're connecting inter, and we're connecting, you know, inter and intra, right? Inter, and out to the world.
Outer.
Outer.
What a concept.
Yes. So, I mean, that's, you know, we think about these things, and, you know, we want to build around these concepts because that's us as a people, us as a culture. So serving everyone in our communities collectively. We are a collective community in our culture and traditions and customs. So reaching every population is very important for us. And that's how we can grow as American Samoa and how we can use broadband to grow together. So I like the no door initiative that UCEDD is leading. And so my one final question for Tafa, and you can also use it for your closing comments, are really what is, you know, UCEDD's next step? Where is UCEDD heading with some of their programs?
Well, currently right now we're still trying to identify all the key programs and services here, including the VA. We wanted to bring them into the conversation as well. So in that way, you know, that no matter what click the person with disability may click on and may not find the answer there, that they can click on another link to access another door of services. But we want to make sure that no matter what they click on, it leads them into another door that hopefully it will answer their question. And so we're hoping that technology will, again, like what you just mentioned earlier, will still connect everybody, you know, keep everyone connected. We're hoping, and I think, I know many cases we talk about it's not accessible, or it, you know, we don't have access to broadband or internet. A lot of times in reality, we don't have access to owning a technology to access broadband.
Right.
So a lot of times I would like to see more people with disability to increase the ownership in technology. I would also like to see people with disability increase financial literacy by accessing online banking. I would also like, and you know, this is like you know, part of me that, you know, throughout my years in the conversation with FEMA and FCC is to see WE alerts, the messaging, the wireless emergency alert messages being delivered and implemented in our territory, because sirens is only valuable to those who hear. So hopefully if we have a good 80–90% of people using cell phones here on island, imagine the number of people we can get the messages out during time of emergency. I would like to see more people access emergency alerts. I would like to see telehealth exist in the schools. But, you know, I think and I know this is a touchy subject when it comes to the Hawaii missile alert incident. You know, last year, there was always a conversation around what went wrong. But working in the disability field where we're always left out, I saw it differently. I saw it in a way of asking, well, who didn't get a message?
Mm.
You know,
Right.
I think that's the important question to ask is who didn't get the message on their phones. So things like that, I start to see it differently. You know, as a person with a disability, we're always excluded. So we like to say, hey, but you know, let's look at it in a positive way. How about, you know, being part of that collective conversation, being that person at the table to have that conversation with a lot of people is what inclusion is all about. So I can go on and on and on.
Well, that's great. Well, Tafa, you know, on behalf of the KokoBytes team here, right? We want to say thank you for all of your service to our community. It takes dedication, passion. Obviously, it takes a lot of love. And I think anyone who's watching, or anybody who knows you and has had an opportunity to hear you speak about your mission in life knows, you know, that this is your life. So thank you so much for what you do for our community. I'll take one note back. I'll have a lot of notes, but one of the areas that I will take with me today is the financial services issue as it relates to people with disabilities, and try to integrate that into some actionable tasks via the broadband strategy work group that we've developed. And so, but that's one of many more I think we can find, but I'll take that one and we'll see what we can do. If Fiji can do it, we should be able to do something very similar here.
Great.
And then for me on our side, as the critical infrastructure working group, we hear you on the WIA alerts, and we've also addressed it with the local carriers. So hopefully something will mature out of our working group, and then that will be able to address that issue. So look for it at the end of that tunnel.
Yeah, let's get some things done.
Yes, with that, thank you, Tafa, so very much for your time with us here on KokoBytes today. Today's conversation on how broadband can service people with disabilities. It's really was an eye-opening for me to hear from Tafa, all the work that she's done over the years and her vision of what she would like to see for American Samoa. So it's something you don't really think about often.
Right. And I'm very disappointed in myself. You know, I try to be a good citizen, you know, and be aware of, you know, all the needs of our community. And granted, you know, my wife and I have worked along with Sandy and her group to, you know, to get not only the children, but adults with special needs out onto the water, you know, and paddle the kayaks and experience some fun that way. But this talk with Tafa has got me thinking a lot more in depth, or with a little bit more precision, on how broadband can really support, you know, this community. And so yeah, no, it was very eye-opening to me too. I think the telehealth topic and the accomplishments and the goals that we have in the area or space of telehealth and telemedicine, or telehealth in particular, can certainly make a big difference in the schools. And I'm excited to learn what our work group does in that area of telehealth, specifically with regards to people with disabilities. But yeah, no, it's very much an eye opener. And like I said, I have a renewed perspective. And thank you, Tafa, for that. That was a very good discussion.
Mm-hmm. So you hear a lot of conversations too in the different departments. So in the DHSS, Department of Health, VOCAB, and even the disaster management group, ODAPA, right? So how do we address, or how do we service this population more better? So it's definitely an area across the board that we need to look at. So they should be at the table for all the conversations.
Right. Even here at Department of Commerce, you know, I've got to make sure that I do that part as well and bring that message home here to our agency. So.
Yeah, so lots of planning, right? Lots of things to do to influence conversations. And so I do see a lot of, I follow them on social media, Sandwich group. I see the sign language and some incorporation. I really, really see people, the different departments are trying. But broadband, taking the conversation back to broadband, this is really another platform that can really help us to service that community.
Right.
I can't say it enough, but you know, this is a tool. It's a powerful tool for us.
Right.
Yes, and definitely telehealth is one of those areas that can be improved, and services provided for this population as well. So
right.
Look forward to that conversation.
Right. And one last comment about something Tafa mentioned or pointed out was, you know, having access to broadband is not the one-all answer, right? We still have challenges in terms of securing resources. And I'm referring to equipment, devices that allow for us to leverage the broadband more effectively on site in the effort of, I guess, delivery of services and that sort of thing. And so we have to be mindful of those needs and prioritize resources so that we don't overlook that variable when we are working on the equation of closing that digital divide. So again, another thing for me to take away from this conversation.
Yes, so not necessarily access to broadband, because that's what we have now. Taking back to my initial comment, it's the how, right? How can we now use it now that we have it? And part of that is getting the right technology that fits with our population. So we have access now to the bandwidth. Now we need to take that next step with applications, and applications come with, you know, the hardware and the software and the training. So all of those components, you know, will get us to where we want to be in expanding American Samoa's broadband economy.
Right. And speaking of expanding our broadband economy, you know, I think down the road we're going to have a conversation about how broadband can help us move on the agriculture side of things. You know, it's getting hot out here in the sun, Ginger, so I think we better wrap this up. Okay. I didn't put sunscreen on this morning, so thank you again to the folks in Aunu'u for allowing me to sit in the taro patch.
Yeah, so with that, thank you so much for joining us today on KokoBytes, where we keep your cup of Koko Samoa full with innovations and creativity in American Samoa's tech community. Pago.